The Buckeyes have 3 players on their offensive roster who could realistically win the Heisman Trophy. Think about that for a few seconds. That's crazy. The last team to even have that was 2020 Bama, and before that, it was a long time before that. I don't even know how many teams had the potential to realistically have 3 guys who could contend for the Heisman Trophy. There's also 2019 LSU, now that I remember. J.K. Dobbins, Chase Young, Justin Fields, but still, this team, this offense is crazy. And that 2019 OSU team had a defensive guy on the Heisman list. This is 3 players on the same side of the ball, on the same roster, the same team, who can potentially win the award, at least I think. This offense is deadly. It's limitless in potential and talent. It just depends on how the coaches utilize it and how disciplined the players are. But the talent, as far as I can see, is pretty limitless. No one or very few teams want to face this team. A lot of teams will be scared to play this offense. It's phenomenal. It's crazy. It is a foreign concept to most teams to have this elite of an offense. And TreVeyon Henderson, CJ Stroud, and Jaxon Smith-Njigba being in the same offensive room is crazy. These guys are returning starters, as all of you who are watching this would know. And today I just figured that we might as well talk about it and talk about these 3 guys who are obviously going to be the main impact, the main force behind this, what I think will be, though nothing is guaranteed, legendary Ohio State offense. I'm going to be talking about their Heisman odds, their stats, what they were last year from my point of view, from the stat sheet, which is I got from NCAA's official website and ESPN, and down below I'm going to link a depth chart projection that was from a few weeks ago, but with spring practice not being over, even close to being over yet, it's still useful at this very moment. So first and foremost, we're going to talk about TreVeyon Henderson. So we're going to be talking about first here. In my opinion, he is the least likely out of these 3 to win the Heisman, yet nonetheless, he's up there in Heisman odds. He's plus 2,000 among the likes of DJ Uiagalelei, Anthony Richardson, Quinn Ewers. He is the second best running back by Heisman odds, behind Bijan Robinson from Texas. And I think that Henderson is better than Bijan, and I think that he will have a much better chance with the offense that he has, the supporting cast, the O-line, the talent to win the Heisman. He'll have a better chance than Bijan, I think. Bijan is a very good back. Henderson, he had some freshman mistakes, but as I've said before, I think that the freshman mistakes are going to come to a close here this year for Ohio State. Ohio State had a lot of turnover from 2020 to 2021, and that's why you saw some freshman mistakes again. But anyway, Henderson is a phenomenal player. Phenomenal is the proper word. 183 rushing attempts, 1,248 rushing yards, 15 rushing touchdowns, almost 7 yards per carry. He was the guy who, in the first quarter and maybe second quarter, depending on the opponent, he would run all over you, slice through your defense, he'd prove himself to be the best running back in open space, and then he would get taken out midway second quarter or after halftime most of the time. TreVeyon Henderson rarely saw action in more than half the game. The Michigan game and the Utah game would be some of the few exceptions to that rule. Michigan, obviously, and Utah, those were games. They weren't blowouts like most of Ohio State's schedule results. Ohio State, despite having that 11-2 record, did blow plenty of teams out of the water. Henderson being a part of that. And Henderson, He 23rd in the nation in rushing yards, 26th in rushing yards per game, not even 100 rushing yards per game. Again, like I said, for about the first, 15, 20, 25 minutes of gameplay, he would get put in, he would make a big play or two, and then be taken out after there was a big enough of a score cushion to let in some of the second stringers in, more often than not. Specifically Master Teague and occasionally Mayan Williams, but earlier in the season, mostly Master Teague. 15 rushing touchdowns, was tied 13th in the nation. Henderson also had 312 receiving yards and averaged 11.6 yards per reception with 4 receiving touchdowns. So, we all know dual threat for a quarterback. I'm just going to use this term. For Henderson, he's kind of a dual threat for a running back. He can catch the ball and he can run the ball, both equally as deadly when given an opportunity to run out in the open. In open space, again, I think he is the best running back in the nation. But what got to him later in the year in November, against teams like Nebraska, Penn State a little bit, though that was the end of October, and Michigan, and even moments against Michigan State and against Utah as well, where he was able to be slowed down. If you could plug in, he couldn't make something out of nothing in a certain sense. It's very hard, or at least it was hard for Henderson to make something out of nothing, which is exactly why Kenneth Walker was recognized as one of the better, as actually the best running back in the nation, because Kenneth Walker with a bad offensive line could make something out of nothing. That is an important trait. Some could argue that isn't necessarily teachable when you're at as good of a school when it comes to offense like Ohio State, because you don't have to make something out of nothing. But it is important to have an ability to adapt, to improvise. Henderson, toward the end of the season, showed, obviously, as he faced tougher teams, somewhat of a lack to do that. That doesn't mean he's a bad running back, though, or even is bad at facing adversity. Against Michigan, he still ran for 4.4 yards per carry for 74 rushing yards and a touchdown. He also had nearly 60 receiving yards against Michigan with a receiving touchdown. Of course, that being on a 4th down, very clutch play where he definitely improvised. He avoided being tackled by Aiden Hutchinson and many others. So he's still elite. He's good at what he does. Yes, there are things he can improve at, but look for Henderson to be even better, to improve. And that, to me, is a terrifying thought. It should be to anyone. TreVeyon Henderson being even better than he already is, especially if the offensive line manages to improve, at least when it comes to facing off against better defenses. So that's TreVeyon Henderson for you. I think that he is the 3rd most likely on my list of the 3 players who I think can win the Heisman, behind Jaxon Smith-Njigba and behind CJ Stroud. And I think that's because Ohio State, with their wide receiver talent, and you've seen this under Day, they're moving. You especially saw this past season, as CJ Stroud is not as mobile as Fields is. Ohio State is they're leaning more toward a pass-oriented attack. Urban Meyer, of course, being one of the guys to implement the spread option, love to run option, though he would adapt to what his quarterbacks could do. But Ryan Day seems to be taking a more quarterback wide receiver approach. And you saw that with Ohio State, I think, this past season had 3 1,000-yard receiving wide receivers, which is phenomenal again. So that's my reason why I don't think TreVeyon Henderson has as good of a chance as, let's say, Jaxon Smith-Njigba does. Jaxon Smith-Njigba had 1,606 receiving yards, which was 3rd in the nation. He set the Rose Bowl record for receiving yards with 347 of receiving yards. He had 123.5 receiving yards per game, which was 2nd in the nation. 7.3 receptions per game, which was 11th in the country. Almost 17 yards per reception, which only being 49th, it's still an impressive feat knowing how there are 3 starting wide receivers on every team in the nation. And with Garrett Wilson and Olave moving on, I'm pretty confident that that number will grow as Smith-Njigba is targeted even more. And he also had 9 receiving touchdowns, which was tied for 31st in the country. Smith-Njigba earlier in the year was not known as much. Did he have a big game against Oregon? Yeah, but outside of that, he only had 2 receptions against Minnesota, Tulsa, Rutgers. He only had 5 against Akron and Maryland. I'd say at the probably around the Maryland game, just looking at the stats here and from what I can remember, mid-October on, his name began to be known, especially after that Nebraska game when I think, Garrett Wilson was out with, I forget if it was an injury or a personal reason. I'm thinking it was an injury, like concussion protocol, if I remember correctly. That's when he really began to be known. Against Nebraska, he had 240 receiving yards on 15 receptions, at a long of 75 and 1 receiving touchdown. Against Purdue, he had 139 receiving yards on 9 receptions and a touchdown. And against Michigan State, he had 10 receptions for 105 yards and a touchdown. And then you go to Michigan, and he once again had over 100 yards receiving, 127 receiving yards on 11 receptions, no touchdowns though. And then Utah, we all know how that game went. Over 300 receiving yards, 347 like I mentioned, an average of 23 yards per reception with 15 receptions and 3 receiving touchdowns. Now, like Michigan State, is Utah's secondary great? No. It's average, below average, bad. But still, it's an impressive feat, and he got better and better and better as the year went on. Nebraska has a good passing defense. Michigan has a good passing defense, and he did well against them. Penn State has a good passing defense, and he had nearly 100 yards against them. So he's played against good teams, bad teams. No matter what team Jaxon Smith-Njigba has played against, it's the same with all of the players that I'm talking about. He's done well. He has excelled. And he's going to likely start at the slot position at wide receiver, though with how good he is and him being the only returning starter at wide receiver, you could move him anywhere and he'll probably have a great amount of success. But he'll likely stay at the slot position, as that where he has done his best work. That's where I'd anticipate him starting at least. And I think that he is the second most likely to win the Heisman Trophy. And I'm looking right now at the Heisman odds list, which is from Vegas Insider. I'll link that down below. He's plus 5,000 to win the award. He's among the likes of Hendon Hooker, a Tennessee QB, Bo Nix, an Oregon QB, Cameron Ward, a Washington State QB. He's with Aiden O'Connell, too, a Purdue QB that we all know and love, one of the best quarterbacks in the Big Ten. I'd say the number 2 quarterback in the Big Ten. His odds are ahead of J.J. McCarthy, a Michigan QB, who's plus 6,600. So those are just some names that he is around. And I think that his odds are better than Henderson once again because of that, the more pass-oriented game. And with Olave and Wilson gone, Smith-Njigba is going to be targeted even more, far more than he was. Again, he did not see nearly the same amount of action or attention that he did earlier in the year. He's going to be receiving that attention all year long. All year long. In every game, no matter what, because now he's a known from the staff, from everyone. His quarterback is going to have the most confidence in him out of any receiver by a mile, because once again, returning experience, he's proven right out of high school 5-star talent. Like this guy, combined with CJ Stroud's arm, who I think is the most likely to win the award, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. I just think it's pretty crystal clear that the passing game here is going to get it done, at least when it comes to the Heisman Trophy, and really to attacking anyone in general. The sport has been moving toward a pass-heavy game for quite some time, and Georgia was one of the first teams this year who won the national title without displaying an amazing elite passing game. And even they had good wide receivers. Stetson Bennett stepped up as a QB. The passing game is becoming incredibly important. There is a place for the run. It's still important. You cannot not run and expect success. Ohio State faced that firsthand against Michigan because Mayan Williams didn't do too well. The O-line didn't perform the best, but nonetheless, passing the ball is of utmost importance. And Jaxon Smith-Njigba, if the other wide receivers don't pan out to be like Garrett Wilson and be like Olave, I think they will, but there's a very realistic chance that it doesn't. And Njigba's the only elite wide receiver. It doesn't matter. He led his team in receptions despite not being a big flashy player early on in the year. And by that I mean not garnering a lot of attention, not being targeted as much earlier in the year. He still led his team straight up in receiving yards. He had almost 10 receiving touchdowns. So in my mind, he should be up there. It's much like Jordan Addison. In a certain sense, I feel like it could be a Devonta Smith situation as well, where because of there's not as much experience at that position on the field, he could be targeted a lot. Where, when Jalen Waddle went down, Devonta Smith, it was basically Mac Jones and Devonta Smith, a little bit of everyone else sprinkled in there, and that's how Devonta Smith won the Heisman Trophy. You could realistically see the exact same scenario, except it won't be because of injury. It will be because of Olave and Wilson leaving for the NFL. You could see the same thing with C.J. Stroud and Jaxon Smith-Njigba, and Ohio State will still, like 2020 Bama, be able to succeed. That's enough about Jaxon Smith-Njigba. Again, a phenomenal elite player, and we're going to end off with C.J. Stroud. C.J. Stroud being a guy who, out of these three, is obviously the favorite to win the Heisman Trophy. He only has plus 400 odds. He is only behind one man, and that man is Bryce Young, who won the Heisman Trophy this past season and deserved it because of how well he did against Georgia, who has an elite secondary, how well he did against them in the SEC championship game. And Stroud actually had more passing yards and I think even more passing touchdowns than Bryce Young did, which is, again, phenomenal. He had 4,435 passing yards, which is fifth in the nation. 44 passing TDs, which is third in the nation. Only 6 interceptions, which is tied for 27th. That's still, top 33% of the nation. And he had the number 1 QB rating in the nation, according to ESPN. And by passer rating, he was second only behind Grayson McCall, which, breaking news, if I could have TV static to get your attention, I'd play that. Breaking news, McCall doesn't play the same level of talent that Stroud does. Granted, he doesn't have access to the same amount of talent on his side of the ball as well, but still. C.J. Stroud is an amazing quarterback. Has better passing abilities, I would say, than Justin Fields does. Does he have the same X-factor ability on the ground? No. I wouldn't say that he has the same ability to do what Justin Fields did against Michigan State, where there was several bobbled snaps. I was just watching some of those highlights today just to reminisce and watch football because there is none on. And Fields could improvise so well on the ground. And Stroud I don't think he can necessarily do that. But he's such a good passer. It's amazing. And just because you're not an X factor on the ground doesn't mean you can't make plays happen on the ground. Stroud has shown an ability to scramble when nothing is open. No, he isn't an athlete like Fields in that sense, but you don't need to be that in order to get a necessary first down on a critical drive. And his throws, don't kid yourself. The speculation at the beginning of the year that he might have been overrated, that he might have been an average QB being carried by an elite system, which it totally looked like that at the beginning of the year. I can't even blame people for thinking that. After he sat during the Akron game, totally changed. He went from having a high passer rating of 22.3, followed by 154 and 127 performances against Oregon and Tulsa, who don't even have that good defenses. So he went from having an inflated opener and 2 bad games in September to having a phenomenal month of October. He threw no interceptions in the month of October, facing Penn State, who has a very good defense. Indiana, no, they don't have an offense, but make no mistake, their secondary and defense was decent, and obviously crushing Maryland and Rutgers. In the month of November, Stroud only threw 2 interceptions against Nebraska. Nebraska having a phenomenal, in my opinion, phenomenal defense. Their offensive inconsistencies, a lot like Indiana's, cost them a lot of games. Nebraska's defense under Eric Chinander this year, when it came to linebackers in the secondary, was really good. He threw for 5 touchdowns against Purdue, 6 against Michigan State. You knew that was coming. And 2 against Michigan. He threw for nearly 400 yards against Michigan. Not a single pick. None. Through the month of November, Stroud's lowest passer rating was 134 against teams who, in all regards, by record, except for Nebraska, are good, and in all regards, by people that pay attention to football and watch most games, all those teams present their own challenges, and he did well against all of them. And against Utah, he was picked off once. That was a stupid throw, but he threw for 6 touchdowns, 573 yards. He completed 80.4% of his passes. It's insanity. He had 583 total offensive yards, including the scramble on the ground for 10. The kid's phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. To me, I think with Alabama losing Jamison Williams and John Mechie to the draft, CJ Stroud, to me, is the guy who should be the front runner for the Heisman Trophy. There's no doubt about it. Bryce Young is amazing. Bryce Young could totally win it over Stroud, and I wouldn't be surprised. But CJ Stroud has Jaxon Smith-Njigba returning. He has TreVeyon Henderson, who can catch the ball, as I've mentioned, returning. And he has, I think, around half, maybe a little more than half of his offensive line returning as well. His wide receivers, like Marvin Harrison, showed out in the Rose Bowl. Julian Fleming, as long as he stays healthy, should continue to mature and eventually, I'd say, start or at least become a second stringer, a part of a 2-deep wide receiver core that can do some serious damage if he needs to play. So, yeah, I mean, Stroud, with the weapons that he has, with his throwing capabilities, resting him against Akron was the best decision of Ryan Day's career. Best decision. I don't know why I messed up that C. It was the best decision of his coaching career, in my opinion, because he was not playing at the standard of that he needed to for Ohio State to win, or at least come close to winning the Big Ten, and especially winning the Rose Bowl. I mean, the way he played earlier in the year, it would have been hard for Ohio State to beat Nebraska and Penn State and Utah and even compete against Michigan. Can you imagine if CJ Stroud against, Michigan or Penn State or Nebraska, a team with a pulse on defense? Can you imagine if Stroud played like he did against Tulsa or Oregon, the same way he played against those 3 teams? It would have been disgraceful. The fan base would have been mad, but his improvement, Ryan Day resting him, and like many of the other players that I've named, he kept improving as the season went on. So there's momentum for all of these guys in the offseason. All of them have a realistic chance to win the award, and that's where I'm going to end today. I think that Stroud is the best chance, but it's very possible if, there's a similar or a correlation with Stroud and JSN that there is or was with Mac Jones and Devonta Smith. There's a good chance Jaxon Smith-Njigba could win the Heisman, which I think, because of the lack of experience at the wide receiver room, it's a great possibility for that to happen. And Henderson, if Henderson really improves, maybe Ryan Day decides to go back to a little bit more of leaning on the run. I don't know why he'd do that with how much talent he has at the wide receiver room, but maybe Henderson just shines. Maybe he can make something out of nothing in certain situations, and maybe he wins the Heisman by way of the ground game. Who knows? All of these guys can contend. There's no reason to overlook any of them, and they're going to spearhead one of the best offenses. Correction, once again, the best offense for 2022. That's all I have to say for this video. If you like this video, like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and comment your thoughts down below. Do you think any of these guys are going to win the Heisman? And do you like any of these guys' chances? Tell me the answer to those questions down in the comments below. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys around. Bye.